Welcome to Tea Tuesday. I'm drinking a black tea with some honey, and it's oh so good. I like to thank Kathy from Kathy's Favorite Things and Patty, Life with Patty, for hosting this collab. And this is informal tea or formal tea. You can drink anything that you would like. It all started out with tea, and then it kind of went from one thing to another, and people now pretty much drink a beverage of their choice. So if you'd like to come in, it's on every Tuesday. You can come and go as you please, and just hashtag lowercase Tea Tuesday. That's it. So today we're going to be doing Don't Be Silly, Mr. Twiddle. We're going to be doing some more reading and the book. Let me find where I left off here. Whoops, almost lost my marker. Okay, it says Mr. Twiddle and the bulbs. What's he going to get into today for trouble? Now, one morning, Mr. Twiddle was reading his paper. Mrs. Twiddle came bustling into the kitchen. Oh, I bet she was. Twiddle, when you go out shopping this morning, I want you to buy me 2 bulbs, please. Certainly, my dear, certainly, said Mr. Twiddle, still reading his paper. We'd better have big ones, said Mrs. Twiddle. They are much better. Really? Though the small ones are cheaper. Right, said Mr. Twiddle, still reading his paper and not taking very much notice. There was a chatter as Mrs. Twiddle popped out to the dustpan, took off the lid, and threw something in the bin with a noise like glass. It was the 2 electric light bulbs that were no good. The kitchen once had gone, and so had the bedroom one. Mrs. Twiddle did hope that Twiddle would remember to buy the new ones when he was out. What do you bet he forgets? Or he didn't understand what she wanted. I suppose you mean to read your paper till it's 1 o'clock and the shops are shut, she said for a while. No, my dear, certainly not, said Mr. Twiddle, hurrying, looking at the clock, 12:30. Dear me, I better go. Now let me see. Fish for supper? Change your library book and, whatever else it is, dear. Bulbs, said Mrs. Twiddle, banging her iron down on the table. Bulbs! Twiddle, I knew you weren't listening to me. I knew. All right, my dear, all right, said Twiddle, and hurried off with a shopping basket before his wife could say a word more. He bought the fish and he changed her library book, and then he stood and wondered, what was the third thing? Ah, of course, bulbs, he said to himself. Now, what sort of a shop do I buy bulbs at? The flower shop, I suppose. Oh, Mr. Twiddle. They grow bulbs in pots and bowls, and I expect they have some still loose to sell. He went to the flower shop, and the girl came forward and asked what he wanted. I want 2 bulbs, said Mr. Twiddle. What kind? Asked the girl. It's a bit late for bulbs, really, you know. You ought to have planted them before this. Oh, said Mr. Twiddle. Well, Mrs. Twiddle didn't say what kind she wanted. What kind can I have? Oh, geez, is he in trouble? Well, there was a little one like snowdrops, said the girl, and the big ones like daffodils and hyacinthus, and middle-sized like tulips. Ah, Mrs. Twiddle said, 2 big ones, said Twiddle, remembering. I'll have 2 of the biggest ones, please. The girl picked him out 2 big daffodil bulbs. These were to be brilliant yellow, she said. You will be sure to keep them nice and wet, won't you? Water them once a week in their pot. Right, said Mr. Twiddle, and took the bag in which the girl had put the bulbs. He paid for them and went home, pleased that he had remembered everything. Well, you haven't been as long as usual, said Mrs. Twiddle. I suppose you didn't meet any of your friends this morning. Well, no, I didn't, said Twiddle, putting the things down on the kitchen table. Where's the fish? And here's the fish, and there's the book, and here's the bulbs. I got 2 nice big ones. Good, said Mrs. Twiddle. Would you like to put them in for me? 1 in the kitchen and 1 in the bedroom. I'll have to get 2 pots then, he said. Twiddle trotted out to the shed. Mrs. Twiddle stared after him in surprise. Did you say they had to get 2 pots? She said. I couldn't have heard him right. After all, he was the only one that got to stand on a chair and slip the bulb into the light for me. Uh-oh. Twiddle went out and found 2 pots. He set a daffodil bulb in each of them. He carried them back into the house and put 1 pot in the kitchen windowsill and 1 on the sill in the bedroom. I've put the pots in the bulb, and I've put the bulbs in the pot for you, he shouted to Mrs. Twiddle, who was in the drawing room. Thank you, cried Mrs. Twiddle. They will be a brilliant yellow, called Mr. Twiddle. Mrs. Twiddle thought he meant that the electric light bulbs will give a brilliant yellow light. Good, she said, coming in the kitchen. We shan't need to sit in the dark now. Twiddle stared at Mrs. Twiddle. That seemed a little queer sort of a remark to him, but he thought it must be a joke. So he laughed heartily. Ha, ha, ha! Mrs. Twiddle didn't quite know why Twiddle was laughing, but she liked him to laugh, so she laughed too. You must water them once a week, said Twiddle. Mrs. Twiddle stopped laughing and looked at Twiddle in surprise. Water what once a week? She asked at last. The bulbs, of course, said Twiddle. Don't be silly, Mrs. Twiddle. Twiddle looked offended. I'm not silly, he said. The girl in the shop said we were to water them once a week. I don't mind you being funny, but I don't like you to be silly, Mrs. Twiddle sharply. All right, said Mr. Twiddle. And he said no more, thinking that probably Mrs. Twiddle knew more about whether to water bulbs or not than the girl in the shop did. Neither of them said a word more about the bulbs, but when evening came and it was dark in the kitchen, Mrs. Twiddle got up to the switch of the electric light. Nothing happened. No light came. Mrs. Twiddle looked at the light. There was no bulb in there. I thought you said you put the bulb in for me, said to Twiddle. So I did, my dear, so I did, said Twiddle, surprised. Well, I can't see a bulb. Mrs. Twiddle screwing up her eyes and looking at the light that wasn't there. It's on the windowsill, said Twiddle. Twiddle? Why on the windowsill? Asked Mrs. Twiddle. Are you mad? I can't see the bulb on the windowsill. Well, only because it's in the earth, said Twiddle. In the earth? Said Mrs. Twiddle, wondering if Mr. Twiddle really had gone mad. Why should you put a bulb in the earth? Twiddle thought. Mrs. Twiddle was being terribly stupid. To grow it, of course, said Twiddle. Mrs. Twiddle looked closely at the windowsill, and she saw a pot on there. She stared at it, and then stared at Twiddle. A funny look came over her face. Twiddle, she said, I suppose you knew I wanted those bulbs to be put into the electric light, didn't you? Twiddle stared at Mrs. Twiddle, and he suddenly felt very uncomfortable. Oh, how very, very awkward. So he had got the wrong kind of bulbs. Dear, dear, he was always doing something like that. Now, what would Mrs. Twiddle say? She would go on and on the whole evening. But she didn't. She suddenly began to laugh. And when Mrs. Twiddle laughed, everyone else had to laugh too, especially Twiddle. Oh, now I know why you wanted me to water and light once a week, laughed Mrs. Twiddle. Oh, Twiddle, you'll be the death of me. Really you will. You'll have to sit in the dark all evening. That's all. If you will buy daffodil bulbs instead of electric light bulbs, I just can't help it. So they sat in the dark and chuckled whenever they thought of the bright yellow daffodils that would grow from the brown bulbs. Funny old Twiddle. He does get things wrong if he can, and he always does. That's the end. We'll see you next Tuesday for more. Have a great day. God bless. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye now.